Have you been, John?
Good.
Yeah. So, you had given your testimony some time ago now. It's been several months. Is that mic okay? That mic's tipping over, isn't it?
No, it's fine.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So you'd given your testimony a few months ago in church, and you talked about a few things there that I didn't know about you. And so I thought we'd do an interview and maybe we'd get a little deeper into the life of John Dahl.
Yeah, it's been an incredible journey. So I don't know where you want to start. I guess you could just ask me. And
Yeah. So when you were, how did you start off? Have you always been an Adventist? Were you raised an Adventist? And what was that like?
I was raised on a ranch in Dakota in the 40s, and Mom was an Adventist. My dad was not, but he liked to preach the sermon to anybody that listened to him, but he was real short on practicing. So that's my background in Adventism. We did go to a little church there in South Dakota for most of the time we were there.
What was your early opinion of the church?
My early opinion was good. Really impressed me at an early age. But it wasn't practiced by my father, so it was really, really hard on me.
Yeah, so you lived a dual household that was real similar to how I grew up. My father was not an Adventist either. He was an atheist actually. And so, but your father later converted, did he? Or
yeah, when he was like in his 70s, before he really turned around. I guess the specter of death will convert most anybody sometimes.
Yeah. And so, but your dad wasn't always the easiest on his kids, was he?
No, he was. For some reason, I was one of the two younger ones, my brother and I, and the older ones had gone off to college, and we were left at home there, and he seemed to change the way he treated us over the others, quite severe, and I don't know. Maybe he'd been drinking earlier, and maybe he stopped. I don't know. Never did figure out why this dramatic change. But it was really bad, a horrible experience.
So there was an actual change that took place in his behavior at some point in your life growing up.
And the older kids couldn't figure it out. He wasn't like that to them. But to us, it was just horrible.
And that was you and your brother. Now, I knew your brother before he passed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's been gone for several years now.
And I think he was so damaged by the trauma of this that his life was a mess the whole time.
Because you once told me that your father would research how to do a certain project, and he'd pick the hardest way, and that's how it was done.
That seemed to be the way it went.
Yeah, and so growing up, now just for context, you grew up on a farm, and you guys raised hay and watermelons and different things. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was mostly a ranch, Black Angus, and 100 sheep, and 6 sections of land.
Mm-hmm.
And only farming was for feed. So that'd be corn and oats.
So you guys grew corn and oats.
And yeah.
Did you raise cattle?
100 head of Black Angus.
And you had sheep at one time too, is that correct?
Sheep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the farming was just for feed for the animals. And of course we had to do the grain harvesting the hard way. We'd go out with an old McCormick dairying binder and turn it into bundles. And then we had to go out there and shock it. And then you had to go out there and pitch it in a bundle wagon and haul it over and pitch it in an old thrash machine.
And that's how you got your grain.
Yeah.
And then what'd you do with the straw?
Well, the machine blew it into a big straw pile.
And then so you had to deal with the straw as well.
Well, the cows would go out there and winter out there.
Okay.
So it was a beautiful place for the cows to survive a North Dakota winter,
Yeah, and those north.
living in a straw pile.
Well, you lived right on the border of North and South
Yeah.
Dakota, but
Yeah.
you were actually in North Dakota.
Yeah, the ranch was just in North Dakota. It bordered the state line. So our mailing address was South Dakota. Closest school was South Dakota. So basically, we did everything in South Dakota except work and sleep. And we did that in North Dakota.
I gotcha. Yeah. So, what was your mother like? Was she a loving mother?
Yeah, she was a real loving, kind person. But I think she was probably running scared of my father. So she wasn't be able to step up and protect us. So anyway, I think she was possibly a little scared of him. And so when he was abused us, she kind of stayed out of the way. I think she was scared of him
Yeah.
in a way.
And and you had contemplated suicide even at one point in your life.
Yeah, I thought about it a few times. It was get pretty miserable at times, you know.
Yeah, he'd just work you into the ground to the point where you just didn't even want to wake up the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what advice would you give people, or young people, that are contemplating suicide possibly?
Well, I'd say just life is always better than not life.
Yeah.
No matter how miserable you get, at some point it's going to get better.
Yeah. Well, it got better for you.
Pardon?
It definitely got better for you.
Oh, yeah, it got supremely better,
Yeah.
but it's just the mercy of God that anything gets better for anybody.
Now, like me, I mean, I was raised like I was raised an Adventist. You were raised an Adventist, but at some point you have to have some personal accountability. At what point do you feel like that was?
Well, I didn't really, wasn't a active church member, you might say, out there. Of course, I was just a kid then. But then we came to Bozeman in '59, and I really wasn't either. I was going to college here, and I pretty much didn't get involved in the church. It wasn't until I got married and moved to Denver that we, through some neighbors of where we rented, we went to some evangelistic meetings in Denver. And my wife and I, we both got active in the church as a result. And so that was like 1966.
Do you feel like you had an advantage over some folks in the fact that you were raised an Adventist? I mean, because we see a lot of people coming into the church from other denominations, other walks of life. Actually, folks, I'll put a link up here. You can watch Roberta's testimony. She was actually Northern Cheyenne and Crow, but we see people from all walks of life coming into this church, and one of the biggest things that they say is, where has this been my whole life? I wish I'd have known this when I was younger. So how has that affected you? Have you felt somewhat privileged by knowing the Advent message?
Well, it's definitely an experience that's way different than anybody else. Because, I learned the message at an early age. And so when I got to MSU up here in the 60s, I was prepared for the evolutionary thinking. I rejected that based on what I learned at an early age. And then I even took a course in religion up there. And just so I could use this knowledge that I had to upset the apple cart. I was kind of that kind of person. You know, this guy was a mainstream Protestant preacher that was teaching the class. And he told the class that Revelation was a closed book. And of course, my hand went up immediately. And I said, blessed is he that readeth this book. You know, so I said, you know, that's the kind of thing when you're raised an Adventist, you're more prepared for. And you're less likely to be shaken by the teachings of the time.
Yeah, so when you heard the evolutionary theories and all that stuff, it just, you were able to reason your way through that.
Yeah, it just didn't stick.
Yeah, see, for me, it was very confusing. I went to a private school, but then later I would go to a public school. And hang on, I'm getting some technical difficulties popping up here, but that's okay. We're back on track. So, but when I went to public school, of course, they taught evolution, and that was very confusing to me. And so, but I was much younger than you were when you confronted that. You know, I hadn't fully developed my opinions on things yet, and I just figured whatever they teach in school has got to be true, right?
I never thought that for a minute.
Yeah. But you kind of forged your own way as far as your thinking went your whole life.
Yeah, I was really independent.
Yeah. So even the Advent message wasn't something that was beyond scrutiny with you.
Right. I had to check it out, you know.
Yeah. Which is really what all young Adventists should do. They should scrutinize the message, and they should very carefully compare it to everything that the Bible says, and then they can own that message for themselves.
Yeah, don't believe something because your parents told you to believe it.
Yeah, yeah.
You need to make it yours.
Yeah, that's a very important thing for anybody in any religion, isn't it?
That's right.
You need to really examine why you believe what you believe and make sure it lines up with the Word of God. And but you were married several times.
Yeah, I took a run at it a few times.
And then you had some falling away too. You kind of went the way of the world for a while. From what I understand, you were quite the beer can preacher.
Yeah, I was good at preaching in bars.
Yeah.
And preaching on job sites. In fact, they a lot of times called me the preacher.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, who knows? Who might been affected by that? God
well, yeah. If he can work through a donkey, if he can speak through a donkey, he can certainly speak through, one of us.
God uses some heathen king to do his service.
That's right.
Like Cyrus. So, yeah, you don't know.
Yeah, but that is interesting. When you have this kind of upbringing like you and I have, you carry it with it. You carry it with you your whole life, and no matter what, it's even though we fall away and we go our separate ways for a while, it just never seems to leave us. It's always there on the forefront. I was essentially keeping the Sabbath in my own way for many years, even when I was drinking and everything else. I was quite the beer can preacher myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's not exactly what you call the life of the party, It's kind of a wet blanket on things sometimes.
My first divorce occurred in 1979, and we were members of the Bozeman Church here, and I was pretty upset with the rejection of the righteousness by faith message that was pretty new to this area. I was used to it because I had been active in a church in Montrose, Colorado, which understood these things much better. And so when I got divorced and everything went bad, the rug was jerked out from under me, so to speak. I thought about that text about being lukewarm. And I said, I got to get out of here unless we get spewed out of God's mouth. So he says, I'd rather you be cold than lukewarm. And so I went cold, ran away from the church, and didn't come back for 30 years. 30. And it's only through God's grace that I'm even here to come back when I did. There's 30 years of daredevil living is pretty amazing. The guy lived through it.
Yeah, and speaking of daredevil living, I mean, you've done pretty much everything one can do to come close to death, right?
Yeah, I'm the poster boy for that. Whenever we would dream up a reckless scheme, we'd go to do it. I was always the leader, and I always did it, and the rest of them all chickened out. And every time I can think of one, that's what happened.
You told me about it. Well, I heard this in your testimony when you stood up there in church, but you were talking about flying an airplane one time and how God had wrought a miracle.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, tell us about that.
We were flying a twin-engine Comanche from Montrose, Colorado to Lake Powell for a little fishing trip. And the plane was owned by two dentists there in Montrose. And so I got to fly this plane a lot because I was friends with both of them. And so we were flying one morning to Lake Powell, and we were up over the Uncompahgre Plateau, pretty much a wilderness. And I was flying the plane, and I had my hand on the two throttles, and normally you just kind of rock your hand back and forth until you hear the wah, wah, wah sound smooth out, and just the two engines are in total synchronization. They're just purring just perfect. So I'm doing this over the plateau, and I can't get it right. And I told the owner of the plane, I said, something's wrong with this airplane. I said, I can't sink it. And he says, oh, you just got jackrabbit ears because the last time we were up in it, something started flapping away on the outside of the plane, and as it flapped quicker and quicker, it finally like it ripped off or something. And so they never did find that when it did the annual inspection. And so he says, you're just hearing things. I said, I don't think so, but it wasn't probably just a few seconds even after I said that airplane basically started coming apart. The vibrations were so bad that you couldn't even see the instrument panel. And the right wing was going up and down about 2 feet. And the right engine the spinner was going around in a big loop. And so, and the stall warning came on because of the turbulence. So I passed the controls over to the owner because he had 5,000 plus hours. And so he immediately feathered that prop on that engine, and it came to a stop, and he started to turn to go back and find a little airport we had passed over up there, teeny little one. And before we completed that turn, this engine started back up. And now this extreme vibration is just getting worse and worse and worse, and we're powerless to stop it. It's a true runaway engine. I've always heard of a runaway engine. Didn't know what it was until that day.
So basically, something was way out of balance. The throttle had stuck wide open.
No. Throttle's turned off. The reason the engine's a runaway is the wind passing over the propeller is turning the engine.
So when he feathered the prop, he feathered it too much or not?
No. Well, we didn't realize what happened until afterwards. The initial, actually, when we landed the plane, luckily we made it, there was 10 inches missing off of one blade. And they were brand new props. They just put them on.
So inexplicably, somehow, the 10 inches of one of the blades just flew off.
Yeah, and I looked at the brake and I could see a part that didn't look right. So there was a factory defect in the prop. And so once we sorted this out, when I was trying to sync the engines, that prop was flexing, getting ready to break off. And that's why I was so used to those engines that I could sense that. And then when the 10 inches broke off, it's in extreme out of balance condition. And the initial shock of that ripped the motor mounts loose. So now the engine's just rolling around inside of the cowling. And when it did that, it broke those little hydraulic line that feathers that prop. So when the owner feathered the prop, it worked. But then, because the line was broken, it went back into pitch by itself. And now we don't have any hydraulics to deal with it because it's all bled off. So now we're helpless. We can't stop it.
Okay, so hence so it's just auto rotating basically, and it's just tearing the whole plane to pieces.
Yeah, it's turning at 2,250 RPM, and it was just insane.
And that's not helping to keep the airspeed up at all.
No, we got one chance to land that plane. Twin Comanches you can't, once you commit on one engine, you have to land. There's no putting the power back on and trying again. It won't do it. You have to land.
So you're in a constant state of descent once you lose that one engine.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. And so we had to fly a lot one direction in order to make that approach.
So were you praying?
I think it happened so fast and we were so freaked out that I think our prayers were more internal, not external.
The Holy Spirit sort of interpreted the moment.
Yeah. But when they did the FAA did the inspection on that situation, they said it doesn't make sense that you guys are alive. He said you should be dead because we can't understand why the engine didn't fall off of the wing because it's just flopping around inside of the cowling. And they said if the engine fell off, you can't control that airplane. It's too out of balance. So we had died.
Yeah. So God had intervened in your life at that point.
Yeah, it was a big time, impressive.
It was a big eye-opener.
Rescue.
Yeah. So you immediately recommitted your life at that point?
Well, I was a little bit presumptuous, I think, at that stage of my life. You know, I just figured God had to save me from all my recklessness.
Sure.
I don't know if you've been there, but...
Yeah, I could say I've probably been there. I mean, that's and God deals with this ignorant way of thinking that we seem to develop at some point in our life, and presumption is just presuming the mercies of God, and taking a lot of things for granted that probably aren't there.
And I was raised with a poor concept of God, in that don't trouble him with minor details of life.
Hmm.
I didn't learn that he was interested in all of our details until just in the last decade or so. Back then, I was figured if it's not a big deal, don't bother him with it.
Yeah, and you've just recently come back to the church again, right? I mean, because you've had 2 failed marriages, and then right when we met you, you were actually married to Sandy, and now when we had met you, we thought you guys had been married forever.
Yeah.
We didn't realize you were newlyweds. But you had recently come back to God, and then you met her in the mall. Or where did you meet her?
No, I was working up in Big Sky with a bunch of drunks, really. And then that was like I finally finished up there in 2008 when the crunch hit. But anyway, I spent a lot of time in my truck driving. Anyway, when you spend so much time driving to work, you listen to the radio a lot. And I stumbled onto a religious station, started listening to it, and it all made a lot of sense. And it was so familiar to my early training that it had a big impact on me.
And do you remember the name of that radio station?
Yeah, it was called Radio 74 International, which is a radio station that originated over in France, and hence the name International. And it was 74 being God's perfect 7 message to the 4 corners of the earth. Anyway, this had a big impact on me, and then I finally sought out the church, and about that time they had an evangelist come, and I came back in a real sense.
Now this radio station, it was Christian, but what kind of Christian denomination put this out?
It's Seventh-day Adventist people that started it.
Okay, so you heard this message again that you had been so familiar with, but at some point the world had kind of, you'd gotten involved with, and so you sort of lost your first love, but then when you heard these words again, that first love began to come back.
Yeah.
And you were single at the time?
Yes.
Okay, and then what? You started coming to church, and then how did you meet Sandy?
Well, then I finally signed up to a Seventh-day Adventist dating site. So I found Sandy on the computer.
Now, how old were you at this point?
I was actually
You were in your 60s, weren't you? Or late 60s?
Pushing 70.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think I was 69. And it's amazing. She was from, the Lake Tahoe area out there in Nevada. And God in his wisdom put us together.
Now, this is amazing because when I met this guy, he's completely computer illiterate, but he was able to get online and find himself a bride with an online dating site. Oh, I think it's wonderful. I really do. And so, but you guys really did behave like the couple you guys had been married forever. That's what I thought. And, but you guys were newlyweds, and you guys had kind of made a pact, that no matter how hard things got, you guys would stick together. This is it. Your third time's a charm. You're not going to go out and do this again.
Yeah.
And it just turned out that Sandy's been a very godly woman and a very good influence in your life.
And she ran away from the church for 30 years just like I did. So we were very similar in our walk. So I'm sure God had something to do with putting us together because of our past experiences. We were ready to be genuine, to take God seriously.
Now, how important is it to have a companion that is devoted to God?
That's really a big thing, because your companion really does strengthen you in times of weakness. They hold up, or you hold up, and they're discouraged. So it's kind of a back and forth. Two are much stronger than one.
Now, in your first marriage, now she went to church with you, right? But was she ever as devoted as you were, or vice versa?
I never figured out how sincere she was. She came from one of the mainstream Protestant churches. And so years later, after we had divorced, I asked her this very question, and she said, well, I was just going to church to control you.
Oh, that's terrible.
But I don't know if
whether she said that out of spite or whatever some time later.
Right.
Yeah, and then your second wife, she never was committed. Is that true?
Well, she was a PhD college professor type, and she really didn't have any exposure to the Christian walk. And so there again with the beer can preacher, went to work on her.
Beer can one hand and Bible in the other.
Exactly. And she, being a very brilliant person, she got a PhD in such a record time that they have her picture hanging on the wall at the university where she got it.
Yeah, and the smarts kind of shows up in your daughters as well, I've noticed.
Yeah.
You got some pretty smart daughters.
And so she would check everything out that I told her, and she found out everything was right. And so then she was teaching these various classes at MSU, and one of them she started teaching was classical like Greek and biblical literature.
Oh, wow.
And so she threw the Bible in there with this Greek stuff, and she got away with it. So she was teaching basically the Adventist theology at MSU and never got busted for it because she cloaked it in this mythology. And the students were so enthralled by what they were hearing that they wanted to follow her home. So it's amazing how people can be so drawn to.
Let's just fix this real quick. Got a lot of background noise coming in. And you can lower that just a hair. There's that better?
That ain't better?
Well, yeah, because I can hear the handling of the mic. Let me straighten it out just a hair.
Got some handcuffs? That'd help.
Well, it takes a little practice because it does. But that's okay. We're rolling along pretty good here, I think.
But anyway, this it was quite an impressive thing that happened there. How God was able to use somebody to spread the message of His truth. And eventually she did attend the evangelistic series at the Bozeman Church and decided to be baptized. But she was really into smoking and drinking wine, and I wondered how that was going to work. And right after she was baptized, she went to Toronto to see her sister. And I said, this is going to be a great opportunity for you to witness to your sister. Well, when she came back, it was just the opposite. She was anti-church, anti-everything, and she just went the other way, 100%.
That's too bad. Now, I do know your second wife somewhat, and she never spoke bad of you. She never took an opportunity to slander you even in the least, and always spoke highly of you and how intelligent you were and everything. But she had just simply just made a choice, and it wasn't, it was just one of those things, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, she had heard the message, she got excited about it, and then she just sort of decided, nope, not for me. And but that sort of when you think about how important it is to have an equally yoked marriage, and of course you have one now,
Yeah.
with Sandy, and so, but if you guys had either one of you guys had been married to someone that was as committed as you were early on, life might have been a whole lot different.
Right.
Yeah. That's a pretty important thing for young folks to realize. A lot of times they'll marry someone with the idea that they're going to convert them, and that just doesn't happen. Usually it's the other way around. They wind up converting the one that has their life devoted to God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My advice to people is to look for your mate in the church. Don't look for him in the bars.
No.
The bars don't work so good.
Coming from someone who knows.
Yeah.
So you recently had a big health issue pop up in your life.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that was?
Well, my ascending aorta decided to fail. And we have no history of heart disease in the family. I'm the youngest. And so I wondered why this is happening. And because there's no, plaque buildup or anything like that.
It was basically a big blood bubble on your aorta, wasn't it?
Well, the aorta had started expanding, which means it's weakening. And then all of a sudden it started leaking a little bit through the layers.
Oh, okay.
And when that happens, you're going to die. You can't survive that. Well, then I realized after I pondered this, why this happened. 7 years ago, I had a four-wheeler land on top of me up in northern Idaho. And
you and Sandy were on some back roads with your quads, just kind of checking out the countryside.
yeah, I was 10 miles back in. Nobody knew where I was. It was fall. And through a bad decision, I wind up with the thing standing on end and throwing me off on the trail and then coming down on top of me.
You weren't trying to show off in front of Sandy, were you?
No, I was by myself. But I hadn't ridden it for a few months. And I was carrying it on top of my pickup, on top of the bed, on one of those racks, so it's quite high. And so you put it in four-wheel drive to make sure you get it up there. Well, I took off up this trail and forgot that it was in four-wheel drive. And so that's really what caused me to crash, is when I was trying to back up to do a turnaround, I popped my throttle to just spin the wheels so I could shift it. When I popped that throttle, it backed up this steep bank at an alarming rate of speed because it was in four-wheel drive. And it just went vertical and dumped me out and then landed on me. And life kind of slows down when that's happening. I got to thinking, this is going to hurt. And then it hit me, and I heard all these bones breaking, and it sounded like popcorn going off on the stove. And man, this is not good. And then as I'm pinned under the thing, I can't move. Can't even move my head to see how it's laying on me. It's 450 pounds on my chest, and I can't get out. And so they're not ever going to find me up here. I have no idea where I'm at. So I realized this is where they're going to find my body, you know. And so then I started asking God for help. And on the third time I asked is when the angel of the Lord come along and pulled me out from under it. It was just...
Yeah, what do you mean by that? What happened?
Well, it's just... I was begging on the third time I'm asking. And all the other times, the 2 previous times I asked, I'd struggle and try to do something, and I can't move. But the third time, for some unexplainable thing, I just slipped right out from under it. So I assume that the angel of the Lord come along and did something to make me able to get out from under it. And so my chest was all ballooned out from a hematoma, but I had full movement in my arms. And so I was able to use the winch and right the machine and get back down to camp. And then they took me to a hospital in Coeur d'Alene and kept me there until they were sure that I wasn't internally bleeding. But this machine came down, the running board came down right across my clavicle and right over my heart.
Mm.
And I was black and blue from, you wouldn't believe.
Mercy.
And so I'm convinced now that did blunt force trauma to this aorta, because that's right there in front. And so after 7 years, it started to fail.
So you could have died then.
Yeah.
You got out of it. Really, you came quite close to death when they discovered what was going on with your heart.
Yeah.
I mean, how did that come about?
Well, through annual checkups, they discovered that I had this aorta that was starting to get big. And they told me now, don't do any heavy lifting. So I was aware that I did have a potential problem. So I was doing a little cleanup in the yard one day on the 4th of May, and when I threw a little piece of cardboard in the back of a dump truck, I sensed something happened in my chest. And I went and sat down, and I had a mild feeling of heartburn. And I remembered what heartburn meant. I heard that was a sign of a heart attack. So by the next morning, I was convinced I better do something because the feeling persisted. So I told Sandy we needed to go to the ER. And I walked in there, and they didn't think anything was wrong with me. No pain, But then they looked at my chart, and they said, Doc said to himself, I think we better put him in the scanning machine and see what's going on. So they put me in there with the contrast dye, and then he could see that the blood was starting to go between the layers of that aorta and starting to leak. And he says, this will kill you real quick. So he started making phone calls, and within an hour or so, I was on a life flight to Denver, where they immediately opened me up, and they had to actually take my heart out and put it on a table to make the connections with this new silicone tubing aorta. And once they got that all attached, then they put it back in, and 8 hours later they restart my heart.
And then somebody took a video of that.
And the surgeon actually
And then you showed me the video.
took a video before he closed me up. You can see the heart beating with that silicone tube in there. But then they put me in recovery room, and I wasn't coming out of it. And then they got worried that I might be done for. But miraculously, I came to. And then they said something about, we're going to have to move you to a new room. And I said, what room is that? The morgue? That's when they decided I'm going to be okay.
He's got a sense of humor still.
He still has it. So 7 days later, I'm on an airplane home. It's pretty miraculous what they can do.
Yeah. Yeah, modern medicine is amazing. To be able to take your heart out and work on it, and then to put it back in, you know. But this reminds me of something else. You know, how Christ works in our lives. You know, he's that great surgeon, that heart surgeon that changes us from the inside out.
Yeah, he takes out the stony heart and gives us one of flesh. Remember that?
That's right. Yeah, and, you know, we're living in a pretty crazy world today. I mean, with all the things that are going on, things seem like they're wrapping up quickly. Like the final events are quickly coming to fruition. And with, you know, especially with this latest COVID, you know, it seems like everything has escalated. You know, we've been losing our rights. We see the Sunday law, or at least how they could enforce the Sunday law. We see all this stuff coming about, and you know, what's a final message that you'd give people that, you know, what should people be thinking about? What should they be doing right now?
Well, we're running out of time. The second hand on the clock of time is dangerously close to midnight. And I think this COVID thing is a test run for the mark of the beast. That's how readily people will wind up receiving it. Because, you know, they're talking about, you know, trying to get everybody to take this shot. And there's no science behind it. And they're just obsessed with getting everybody to take it. They got lotteries now where people have won 10,000 because they went and got a shot. Does that tell you something about it? Why are they so bent on getting everybody vaccinated?
Yeah, Roberta lost her job because she wouldn't take the shot.
Yeah.
She's a health worker. And, you know, they basically gave her papers, her walking papers.
And it's a experimental gene therapy. It doesn't classify as a vaccine. That's a misnomer. They're using that just so they can be exempt from lawsuits when it goes bad.
So what gets me is the fact that you know, they're forcing people to take these vaccines, and prior to that, you couldn't force anybody to take a vaccine. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
You know, and with the HIPAA laws and everything else, you can't ask somebody about their medical history or any of that. You can't require people to divulge that information, but now they are. But it's not the law. It's not the law enforcement doing this. It's the actual places of business that are demanding that you do this.
Mm-hmm.
I find that very fascinating.
But this has happened in the past. You know, this is nothing new. This vaccine craze has been around a long time. Like I remember stories of them chasing down these Aboriginal children in Australia, running them down with Land Rovers, and then jump out and run on foot and catch them and shoot them up with this vaccine. When they were told that this is dangerous because these kids are undernourished, and it was a very dangerous thing to do. But they were just bent on vaccinating everybody. So it's been around a long time.
It makes you wonder what's behind all this.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's and I believe that people should be able to make up their own minds when it comes to their own body. I mean, if you want to get vaccinated, then get vaccinated. If you don't, you shouldn't be forced to. But the idea is that if you don't get vaccinated, then you're putting everybody else at risk.
Yeah, that's what there's no science behind this.
And then we see this global warming thing taking over. Now, the global warming seems like it might push the Sunday law through more than anything that's come by so far because of the specific language in the law that they're trying to actually make a day of rest to let the environment rest.
Right.
Especially with these lockdowns.
That's one thing that's come out of this lockdown is that strengthened this thinking on this day of rest. Unfortunately, it's going to be the wrong day.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be the day that they've been pushing for many, many years, subtly and otherwise, and less so subtle, less than so subtly, in times past.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was death decrees that if you didn't keep the Sunday, during the Dark Ages.
Yeah.
And thanks to all the Protestants that have come out of these systems, that have exposed a lot of the false teachings and stuff all through the years, And, we have Martin Luther and Wycliffe and Jerome and Huss and many others. And we wind up today, we feel like we're a remnant, the remnant end result of that Protestant movement that began so many years ago. The Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Unfortunately, the history always repeats itself. And so they'll eventually be trying to kill you, too, for not conforming. That's the only way Satan and his dark forces operate, is with force.
Yeah, so what should Christians be doing now in the light of everything that's taken place? What should be our battle cry?
Our battle cry is to live the Christian life so your neighbors see it.
And
be able to see the character of God. That's God is a God of love, not a God of force or a God of vengeance. And so many people have been misled by false teaching that they think God is just out to get them. And God's people need to demonstrate his true loving character to the world.
Yeah, and that's all kind of wrapped up in the three angels' message as well. His message of mercy, his message of judgment, because the message of judgment is a message of mercy. Look, the house is on fire, get out.
Yeah.
That's what it's saying. And so when this is all over, nobody can say, hey, I wasn't told.
That's right.
We're all going to be, that final message is going to go to every corner of the earth. And so all of us need to be involved in proclaiming that message in one way or supporting it in some way or another.
That's right.
But it sounds like our time's about up, huh, John?
Yeah, I think we're running out.
Yeah, I hear a little music playing in the background. That means church is almost up, and there'll be a throng of people in here in no time flat. So, hey, folks, thanks for watching. Hit that thumbs up and subscribe if you like this kind of content. There's a lot more of this coming. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on the next one.